Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Introduction to Self-Harm. My name's Mark Wigley, and I'm going to be talking about self-harm today. So, different training options that I offer for future reference for you. I run my own company called Meducate Training Limited, commonly known as Meducate First Aid Training, an online e-learning site called MW Online Training, which this webinar is part of, and then also Boost Your Training at markwigley.online as well, which does things like webinars. We offer classroom face-to-face training from meducatetraining.co.uk, e-learning available at mwonlinetraining.uk, and also www.markwigley.online for more online webinars. In particular, my very well-known and well-respected Ligature Train the Trainer program as well. This is a free introductory webinar to introduce you to me and the training that I offer. And it's going to lead on to a series of low-cost webinars exploring the subject of self-harm in much more detail. They're going to be about £2 a webinar, £1.99 a webinar or something, so it's going to be pretty cheap. The reason why I'm doing these webinars is there's now an increasing expectation on care providers to account for self-harm when it comes to people they support. And in fact, NICE have issued some guidance last year on this subject. So it's really worth reading that and looking and drilling down into that and seeing what needs to be done in your organization to account for self-harm, to make sure the people you look after are properly supported if they are at risk of self-harming. What we're going to look at this morning is what self-harm is, why people do it, and sometimes there's a bit of confusion about why people do it. I often ask people in training, why do you think people self-harm? And they say, well, it's because they want to get a release from trauma, or they want to distract themselves from what's going on inside their head. That's not really why people self-harm, it's what they get out of self-harm. The reason why people self-harm, we need to look back in time at past situations or past experiences they may have had, which have led them to using self-harm as a way of dealing with those situations. We're also going to be looking at the relationship between emotional pain and physical pain, which goes back a long way in terms of human history. So people that use physical pain to try and mitigate emotional pain they might be suffering. And then we're always going to look at different types of self-harm that somebody might engage in. And then finally, how we can help someone who is self-harming. And we can. Many people recover from self-harming, either all by themselves or with some therapy or with help and support from other people. So it is possible for people to overcome self-harming. People tell you that, oh, I'm never going to get over this, I'm never going to deal with this, I'm never going to get any better. That's not entirely true. Many people do recover from self-harming, and they never do it again. They may still have the urges later in life to self-harm when something happens, but they are they either ignore the urge or accept the urge and just wait till it passes, or just get used to really sitting with distress. And that's something we need to be able to do as human beings. We need to be able to feel distressed or sad or lonely, and then not resort to some serious behavior to try and deal with it. We just sit with that distress and we learn to let it pass by until we feel better. So what is self-harm? Well, self-harm is defined as deliberate injury to oneself typically as a manifestation of a psychological or psychiatric disorder. So self-harm is not a mental health disorder on its own. Back in Victorian times, it was believed it was a mental health disorder, but it's not. It's a manifestation or a consequence of feeling some other form of to have some other mental health disorder. Actually, self-harm is a very big subject. It relates to lots of different harmful behavior that someone might engage in towards themselves. So when we talk about the type of self-harm, when we talk about somebody cutting their arms or putting a ligature on or burning themselves, whatever it might be, we need to break that down to what that behavior actually is. And what we're talking about today really is non-suicidal self-injury, which is a subset of self-harm. So non-suicidal self-injury is the harm that somebody commits to, does to themselves, so the injury they do to themselves that isn't suicidal in nature and doesn't have any other reason for doing it. So we're talking about a quite a narrow subset, which is non-suicidal self-injury. And in places like the US, that's the preferred term for this type of behavior. So self-harm, huge area, non-suicidal self-injury, a subset of it, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So the key thing there is non-suicidal intent. So the person's hurting themselves without the intention of attempting suicide. And in fact, sometimes the self-harm behavior can actually, this non-suicidal self-injury can actually be a way of stopping suicidal thoughts or suicidal urges. So it can be very useful to the person in that respect, in stopping them from going on further and attempting suicide. Scale of the problem. Well, the behavior itself is quite hidden, so we don't really know how the exact number of people that engage in non-suicidal self-injury. So for things like cancer and other medical problems, we know roughly how many people have those diseases because they go and seek help for it and there's treatment for it. But in the UK, we don't know the hidden nature of the behavior. There's a lot of stigma involved in self-harm, around self-harm. People don't like to talk about it. They'll try and hide it if they're doing it. And some people will go out of their way to avoid being discovered with their non-suicidal self-injury. But what we do know from research is that non-suicidal self-injury is relatively common in the UK, especially among adolescents and young adults. There's been lots of different studies done into it. One study, for example, found that 17% of males and 29% of females in the UK reported engaging in non-suicidal self-injury at least once in their lifetime. Another study found that 17% of young adults in the UK had engaged in non-suicidal self-injury at some point in their lives. And we know that non-suicidal self-injury, whilst it can occur at any age, is most common amongst adolescents and young adults. Some research suggests that the peak age is around 15 to 16 years old. We know the range is broader than that. We know it's between about 11 and 17 years old. It tends to start as young people approach puberty and adolescence and as they start secondary school, for example. We also, and this research also suggests that more females engage in non-suicidal self-injury than males do. And interestingly, when you look at figures for suicide, you find that it's mostly men that attempt suicide and not women, and it's mostly women that engage in non-suicidal self-injury rather than men. But it's some interesting comparisons there. Another study says that 24% of 14-year-olds have self-harmed, and that the average age of self-harm is 12 years old. There's lots of different figures there from lots of different studies. So a brief history of self-harm. How long has it been going on for? Well, it's easy to believe people that say that self-harm is caused by social media, or that self-harm is caused by the pressure, it's been caused by the pressures of modern life. In fact, that's neither of those things are true. Self-harm's been around for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. We can date it as far back as ancient Greece. We can date it as far back as medieval times, and we can date it as far back as Victorian times. There's not something that's just popped up in the last 20 years or in the 21st century. It's been around for a long, long time. People have been engaging in it for a very long time. People have been using physical pain for all sorts of reasons, for religious reasons, to deal with emotional pain, to demonstrate their devotion to deities and gods. And they've been using it to deal with mental health issues that they've had or are having. Victorians in particular were very interested in self-harm, and phrases like self-mutilation were used, which isn't a great phrase, but self-mutilation was a phrase that was used back then. And Victorian doctors were really interested in why people did it. And you can go online and you can read some of the reports that were made in those Victorian hospitals around people that were self-harming and what they did to try and work out why they were doing it. It was thought in the Victorian, sort of 19th century, it was thought that self-harm or self-mutilation was a mental health condition on its own, and we know that isn't the case. We know now that isn't the case. In terms of social media and its effect on self-harm, the evidence is that self-harm doesn't cause, that social media doesn't cause self-harm. So if you don't self-harm, watching self-harm on social media doesn't lead you to suddenly start self-harming. But we know that if you already self-harm and you watch information about it on social media, then that may increase your likelihood of engaging in a self-harm behavior. It's an easy conclusion to come to that self-harm has been caused by social media, because if you look at the rate of reported self-harm amongst young people, it rocketed or went up very, very suddenly in 2007, which is about the time that Facebook started. So it's easy to make those two links, but we know that's not the case. So many different forms it can take: cutting, burning, banging, hitting yourself. They're just some common ones, but there's many more types of self-harm as well. The common forms of self-harm include cutting or carving the skin with a sharp object. People often think about razor blades or scissors, but in fact, you can use anything that's got even a blunt edge to cut yourself. So people will use bits of broken plastic, cardboard, all sorts of everyday items that they can get hold of and modify to cut themselves with. And they can also use the kind of traditional things that you think about, like razor blades and scissors. Common forms of self-harm can also include hitting or biting oneself, burning the skin with a lighter or other heat source. Again, these things aren't difficult to do. They don't require massive levels of preparation or equipment to do so. Someone might pick something up at school or at college, bring it home, and then use it to hurt themselves with. If they have a wound already from some situation, medical or self-harm or otherwise, then picking at that wound and trying to reopen it or insert things into the wound, or remove scabs, deliberately removing scabs, again, is another example of self-harm. One that was documented quite well in Victorian times was people pulling out their own hair or pulling off the hair on their eyebrows as well. Excessive scratching or picking at the skin, resulting in damage or scarring. When I was at school back in the early 80s, there was a thing that went around our secondary school called chicken scratching, which was where you got a sharp implement like a school compass, and you would then repeatedly scratch the front of your hand. And the idea was you count each scratch that you did, and the more scratches that you were able to tolerate, then the tougher you were. So you ended up with it was all boys that did it. You would walk around, see lots of boys walking around the school with infected hands where they'd excessively scratched themselves. Swallowing non-food items, so deliberately eating and swallowing things that you shouldn't be eating, such as paper or dirt, and then purposely breaking bones. So these are just examples, there's many others as well, including things like putting a ligature around the neck. Unfortunately, like most medical conditions or mental health issues, there are plenty of myths around self-harm. There's some really nasty ones that don't really help people that do self-harm. The two really common ones, or one really common one, is that self-harm is always just attention-seeking behavior, or that self-harm is manipulative behavior, so trying to make someone change their behavior by self-harming. We know that's none of those things are necessarily always true. We know that self-harm is done for a variety of different reasons other than just attention-seeking or manipulating the others. Is it done for attention-seeking behavior sometimes? Of course it is. Is it done to manipulate people sometimes? Of course it is. But it's not true that this is always the case. We need to be really careful that, one, we don't ignore self-harm behavior, and two, that we don't dismiss it as just being one of these two things. We need to get to the root of why the person is engaging in that behavior. So, myths. Self-harm is a cry for attention. Well, while it's true that some people who self-harm may be seeking attention, it's not always the case. We know that because many people who self-harm go to great lengths to hide their behavior. And I've encountered people in my professional and personal life that self-harm, and unless they told you they did it, you'd have absolutely no idea they were doing it, because they went really out of their way to try and disguise the fact that they were doing it. And one of the reasons for that is, if you are intending to self-harm and you know you're going to get something out of it, why would you pre-warn people that you're going to do it? Because you know that they're probably going to try and get in your way and stop you. Let's say that, and a good analogy to use would be, if you imagine making a sandwich. Imagine if making a sandwich was illegal. And you go into the kitchen and you want to make a sandwich, and the ultimate goal of making that sandwich is to consume it and get the pleasure out of consuming the sandwich. You wouldn't go around telling people you're about to make a sandwich, because you know someone is going to come in and prevent you from making that sandwich, and then take away the pleasure you would have got from enjoying that sandwich. So lots of people self-harm, and they go out of their way to prevent people finding out because they want to go ahead and engage in that behavior. Also, they might feel ashamed about doing it as well. So don't expect, especially if you're a parent or carer, don't expect to always find out that your child is self-harming or your relative is self-harming, because you may never find out, maybe not for years or years or years. Myth, only teenagers self-harm. While self-harm is more common among teenagers, it can occur at any age. And we know that people of all ages, all genders, all sexes, all backgrounds, all cultures may self-harm. So it's not confined to one group of people or one area of the world or one ethnicity or one biological sex or one gender. It can occur anywhere, anytime, to anybody, but it is mostly young people that do it. Myth, people who self-harm are suicidal. Well, that's not always true either. So while self-harm and suicidal behavior can occur together, they are not the same thing. Many people who self-harm do not have any suicidal thoughts or intentions at all. And if they do, sometimes self-harming can actually be a coping mechanism to prevent those suicidal thoughts or behaviors. Self-harm is a phase that people will grow out of. Well, sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. The serious issue, however, that may require some professional help and treatment. Whilst it's true that some people do stop self-harming all by themselves as they go through adolescence, some people don't, and they need professional help in order to do so. And we can't ignore it. If it's happening, we can't just assume they're going to grow out of it and it's just a phase, because it can have some serious short-term and long-term consequences if it's left untreated. So what do people get out of self-harming? Now, this is not why they self-harm, this is what they get out of it. So what they get out of it is some type of relief from anxiety over something that's happened in the past, or anxiety over something that's going to happen in the future, or fear about something that's happening right now, or dealing with some kind of difficult memory or trauma from their past. There's a distraction. It alters the focus of their attention from these negative thoughts or disturbing thoughts, gives them some control over their minds, and gives them some release or relief from the tension associated with those strong emotions or overwhelming thoughts. They feel disassociated or numb about reality, then hurting themselves physically can bring them back to the real world. A bit like pinching yourself, to see if you're dreaming. They apparently say you're supposed to do. So it's a way of expressing themselves or communicating something to other people that they're feeling that they can't otherwise articulate. It might be their way of telling you that they need something or they want something, or they're feeling the way they do. Some people will self-harm as a way of punishing themselves for something that they feel responsible for. So, for example, in a past job, I used to regularly visit a young female that self-harmed, and the reason why she self-harmed was because she blamed herself for the death of her mother many years beforehand, and around the 2 or 3 weeks around the anniversary of her mother's suicide, she would engage in self-harm behavior as a way of punishing herself to assuage the guilt of what she felt was her responsibility over her mother's suicide. Some people can experience a temporary but intense feeling of euphoria that occurs in the immediate aftermath of this behavior. So the release of chemicals in the brain that give the person a sense of euphoria. You've probably all heard of endorphins, the body's natural painkiller. So they get this rush of euphoria as a result of inflicting pain on themselves. And that can give them some form of temporary relief. How do you know if someone is self-harming? Well, you might never find out. Many people who self-harm hide it from their friends, parents, and or teachers, and go to great efforts to conceal their scars. So somebody might start doing it, continue doing it for a period of time, and then stop doing it. They don't tell anybody, nobody finds out, and it just becomes something they did in their life. And maybe years later, they're sat down with their family, and their parents are watching a TV program together about self-harm, and the child, now an adult, says to their parents, "Oh, I used to do that." And the parent goes, "What? I didn't realize that." So some people never find out that somebody's doing it. It is possible to spot if somebody's self-harming sometimes. So we're going to be looking for their behavior, changes in their behavior, and the symptoms of self-harming or the signs of self-harming. So the scars or injuries caused by the non-suicidal self-injury. The paraphernalia discarded after self-harm behavior, like bloodied or broken, items that they've used to hurt themselves with, used ligature discarded in the bin, or bloody tissues in a waste bin. So we might see the aftermath of the self-harm. But sometimes it's not what you see, it's what you don't see that offers a clue that they might be self-harming. So for example, a change in what they wear. So let's say you've got somebody who normally wanders around in a t-shirt and short sleeves most of the time. All of a sudden they are now wearing long sleeves, even in weather where they would normally wear short sleeve clothing. They may not want to get changed around other people, activities like swimming, for example. I used to know somebody who would put ligatures around their neck, and we always knew when they'd done it because they would suddenly start wearing polo necks and roll the polo neck right up to their chin so you couldn't see the marks underneath. So we might see behavior and we might see signs and symptoms of self-harm as well. If you do, speak to the person about it and tell them what you've noticed, and try and engage them in a discussion, if they're willing to, about what they're doing and the reasons for them doing it. It might be something that you're able to fix for them, or signpost them to a service that might be able to help them. Yeah, it might be something really simple. Let's say they've got anxiety about an upcoming exam, for example. That's why they're self-harming, because it takes away the anxiety. You might be able to offer them some support and help very quickly that takes away some of that anxiety. The solutions aren't always complex. It's trying to deal with that problem, the root cause of why they self-harm. What should you do? Whilst we want to talk to the person about their self-harming and tell them that we've spotted that they're doing it, we don't want to barrage them with hundreds of questions, because we don't need to get all the answers at once as quickly as possible. We want to look after the person and keep an eye on them without putting them under 24/7 surveillance or policing them too much, because actually might have the opposite effect and increase their risk of self-harming. We need to consider whether they're doing it in places that can't be seen in terms of location or on their body as well. And don't look at the self-harm in isolation. It's a coping mechanism to cope with an underlying problem, which we need to identify. We need to find out why they're doing it. Otherwise, we've got no chance of changing that behavior or stopping it if we don't address the underlying issue as to why they started doing it. So if I say to somebody, do you know why such and such is self-harming? And that person says to me, oh, they're self-harming because it takes away it deals with their anxiety. My next question is going to be, no, that's not why they self-harm. That's what they get out of it. Why are they self-harming? What is the reason for doing it? Oh, I'll go and find out. And they come back and say the reason why they're self-harming is because they're anxious about X, Y, and Z, or they're scared about A, B, and C. Once we know that, then we can start to take steps to try and deal with that underlying problem. It's important to always try and keep open communication between you and the person. No judgment. Don't judge their self-harming. Don't jump in and offer a bunch of solutions. Just try and keep open communication. Try and encourage them to come and talk to you at a time that is convenient for them. For example, if you saw somebody, flailing around in the water, drowning, and they were shouting at you for help, you wouldn't turn around and you wouldn't shout across the water and say to them, oh, I can come and help you, but not until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. You need to be able to try and offer some type of help for them there and then, or when they want to talk to you about the situation. Don't try and force them into taking help. all these things. If we get these things wrong, we can make the self-harming worse for the person. We're adding more stress and anxiety into their life. Talk to the person, but try not to get into a hostile confrontation. Keep your opinions about self-harm to yourself if you've got negative opinions about it. One thing sometimes people do is they withdraw boundaries and withdraw discipline from the person because they're worried that enforcing those boundaries or putting that discipline in place is going to make the self-harm behavior worse. Sometimes it does, but it's important to try and keep a sense of normality and keep those boundaries in place. Because as much as young people tell you they don't like boundaries and they don't like being told what to do and they don't like discipline, actually they do. Boundaries and discipline are a good structure for a young person, and it helps them feel secure, and it gives them a sense of normality. If you feel confident about it and the person's happy to, you can ask them, do you think it would help you if I removed these items that you're using to self-harm with? Would it reduce temptation? Would it help you use something less? Would it help you use something more sanitary next time to self-harm with? It's a difficult conversation for some people to have. And some people that self-harm actually like to have items around them they can use because it gives them the security of knowing that they've got something there ready to use if they experience problems. So it's different for different people. But it's worth asking the question, if you feel confident, would it be beneficial to you to take these items away to reduce temptation? They might say yes, they might say no. If you're not confident in doing this, seek professional advice. If the person's self-harming, they need professional help. If you're not qualified to give that assistance or that help or support, then refer them or signpost them to somebody that can help them. What you should never be is that person's sole source of support. So you need to encourage them to talk to their GP. Can they be referred to a CAM service? Can they get psychological treatments or psychiatric treatments to deal with the condition that's causing them to feel like self-harming? Whilst waiting lists are long for these services on the National Health Service, they can be accessed privately more quickly, and they can be accessed at a much lower cost than people actually might think it is. So there's nothing stopping a private access to private mental health care for people. Dealing with self-harm can be a traumatic experience for people. So you need to also make sure that you are okay. Otherwise, you might end up in the same situation. It's natural to feel guilty or shameful or angry or sad or frustrated or despair at the situation, and you might think it's your fault. It's not your fault that person is self-harming, but it is your responsibility, now that you know about it, to try and help the person and do something about it or signpost them towards treatment. Don't let your feelings of guilt or shame stop you from helping the person. It's not your fault that they chose to self-harm. But it's their chosen way of dealing with their situations. So what should you do? Well, what should you not do? More importantly, you should not try to force them to stop self-harming. You're taking away the only way they've got of coping with their emotional distress. If you take that away, you're now leaving them with no other coping mechanism. We don't need to try and force them to stop immediately anyway. So don't try to force them to stop. We do that, we run the risk of things getting worse for the person. But you've now taken away their only way of coping with their circumstances. Sadly, the most common reason given by young people for self-harm behavior is problems with relationships at home, so close family members. You want to work on improving a relationship with that young person, not making it worse by going in all guns blazing and trying to resolve the situation immediately. You know, as parents, we all want the best for our children. We don't want our children distressed or hurting from whatever situation. And our natural tendency as parents is to rush in and try and make everything better immediately. There's some problems with that are we can't make it better immediately, especially if we don't understand the reason why the person is doing it. It might be something that you've said or you're doing as a parent, or some problem with your relationship that you're not even aware of. So sometimes it does involve the people around the person that self-harms taking a good look at themselves and thinking, am I contributing to this self-harm behavior? It's not your fault that they're engaging in the self-harm behavior, but is your relationship contributing to it, or something you're doing contributing to it? It's not your fault, you're not to blame, but it's your responsibility. So we want to try and keep that relationship going. We want to make it better if we can. And we certainly don't want to make the relationship worse than it already is. That can be between a young person and a carer, a young person and a teacher, a young person and a parent, whoever it might be. Treatment for self-harm. So a person who is self-harming may need to be shown other ways of dealing with emotional pain that do not involve inflicting physical pain. So what we want to try and do is break the link between solving and mitigating emotional pain with physical pain. The issue is they found a method that works for them. So why would they bother looking for anything else? Why would they go out looking for other ways of dealing with their emotional pain when they've got one that's easy to do and has immediate results? Once we start showing them that there are other ways of dealing with emotional pain, or signposting them towards other ways of dealing with emotional pain, then we can start to break that link. Lots of things are talked about in terms of allowing people, different way, encouraging people to use different ways of self-harming that are less harmful, like using elastic bands or ice or eating chili peppers and things like that, which create some physical pain, which isn't harmful and gives them kind of the same feeling that they got when they were doing the more serious stuff. But that really isn't a long-term solution, because it doesn't break the link between emotional pain and physical pain, which is what we ideally want to do. And we also want to try and break the link, break the urge to do something every time the person feels emotional pain. Sometimes, as adults, as we grow older, as adults, we learn that sometimes we're going to feel sad, we're going to be distressed, but that feeling will pass without us having to really do anything. So sitting with distress is another important tool that we might need to teach a young person. It's okay to feel sad for a short period of time. It's okay to feel anxious or nervous for a short period of time. It's okay to be scared of something. Words like traumatized are used very widely now to describe what really is just feeling a little bit distressed. Being traumatized is entirely different from just feeling a little bit scared or a little bit anxious. It's okay to feel anxious before an exam. It's okay to feel distressed when having a difficult memory. So teaching people to learn to sit with distress, sit with anxiety, and then just let it pass. Because we all know that most of the time it does pass, and it doesn't bother us afterwards. Although we know that self-harm does not always lead to suicidal behavior, we do know that people who are at risk, people who do self-harm are at a higher risk of suicidal behavior compared to the general population. And the reason for that is, to get to the point where you're ready to attempt suicide, you have to have two things in place. You have to have the serious intention to do it, plus you have to have overcome the fear of the pain of doing it. Now, if you're self-harming, then you've already started the journey on the second one of those things. So you're already getting used to inflicting pain on yourself. So you're getting used to the feelings of pain. All you need now is the additional intense, serious intention of doing it. There are many people that have suicidal thoughts that never go through with them because they're terrified of the pain of actually doing it. They haven't reached that level of bravery yet where they're ready to do it, because at the moment they're too scared to do it because of the worry about the pain. If you're already self-harming, you're already inflicting pain on yourself, then you're already part of the way there. Depending on what studies you read, and there's been lots and lots of studies done on the subject, the prevalence of suicidal behavior amongst people who self-harm ranges from 14 to 50%. It's really important that with self-harm, you get that person. Another reason why it's important that you don't ignore the behavior and that you seek help for it. You also have the window of time. So research shows that the average time from onset of non-suicidal self-injury behavior to attempted suicide, if it happens at all, is 3 years. Remember, that's an average. There will be people that attempt suicide in less than 3 years, and there will be people that attempt suicide over 3 years. Which is why we don't have to try and sort everything out straight away. We've got time to get a proper support plan in place for the person and try and help them through whatever situation is causing the non-suicidal self-injury. So remember, we've got that window of time, 3 years. It's very rare for somebody to go from not self-harming not self-harming, and then the following day they self-harm, and the following day they attempt suicide. That's quite rare. So there is a time frame that we've got to work with people that self-harm. We need to make sure we do adequate risk assessments over the risk of suicide as well for people. We've also got windows of resilience as well. These are times in the person's life where they've resisted the urge to self-harm. They've had the urge and they've gone, nah, I'm not going to do it. This shows that they're developing resilience, they're developing some mental toughness, some resilience to resist the urge to self-harm. So when somebody's telling you, I'm going to self-harm in a minute, I'm going to cut myself, we can say to them, do you remember the other day when you had, or last week when you had the urge to do it, and then you didn't do it? What did you do last time? And how did it make you feel afterwards when you realized you'd resisted the urge? Could you apply it to this situation? So people do resist the urge to self-harm because it doesn't, it's not there all the time, and it tends to come and go. And sometimes they won't do it. And if we can remind them of those situations where they didn't act on the urge, and then get them to think about what they did, then they may be able to do that again, and they may then not do it. So we need to be reminding them of the times when they showed resilience or mental toughness around the urge to self-harm. And if we look at people years later that haven't self-harmed for many years, they'll often tell you that they still get the urge to do it, it's just they don't act on it. They sit with the distress, or they find some way of diverting themselves, distracting themselves. It doesn't involve any form of self-harm. So we know people can do it. So these ones here, the ones I was talking about just now, the rubber bands, the ice, the handful of hot chili peppers, there's many other examples. These are safer alternatives, but they're not really a long-term solution. They don't break the link between emotional pain and physical pain. Best chance of recovery is breaking that link. There are lots of treatments for self-harm. We can use psychological therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and then mentalization-based therapy. There are lots of different treatments for it. As with all therapies, some work better with some people and some work less well with other people. In order to engage, for someone to have this therapy, they need to go to a proper licensed professional, not something that you can offer somebody from just doing a course on the internet and then thinking that you can do it. So it's professional therapy. Other treatments of self-harm include medicines to treat the mental health issues that's causing the self-harm problems. So treating the depression or the schizophrenia or harmful thoughts, that kind of thing. That way, we can then hopefully, if we can deal with the root cause of the problem, we might be able to stop the self-harm behavior. Can people stop self-harming? Yes, we know they can, because many people do. It's not the case that the person's going to be doing it for the rest of their life. Some people just stop doing it as they get older. They go through adolescence, the brain, the problem that they've got goes away, or they find a different way of dealing with it, and then they stop doing it. Some people need treatment. Some people stop for a while and then lapse or relapse. So there's a mixed bag really with recovery, but with what the studies show are that most people make a full, they stop doing it. I don't like the word recovery because it's a bit like an alcoholic. Alcoholics are alcoholics. They're just alcoholics who have recovered. What am I trying to say? Someone who's sober is still an alcoholic. They're just an alcoholic that doesn't drink alcohol. In the same way with self-harm. People that self-harm are still people that self-harm. It's just the fact that they now don't do it. Still get the urge to do it, and then they just resist the urge, or sit with the distress, or find a different way of dealing with it. Some people stop for a while and then lapse or relapse. So they might go for months or years without doing it, and then some big adverse life event happens, and that causes them to react instinctively to it, and then act on the urge to self-harm. We need to then, and then it can become the end of the world for them because they start catastrophizing. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go back to doing it. I'm never going to stop again. When in fact, it might just be a case of helping them get back on track to stop doing it. Do your best to improve your relationship with the person because it will help them. We know that having positive, good relationships with people around you helps with mental health issues and that kind of thing. Okay, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me at boostyourtraining@markwigley.online. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, there will be some future webinars, a whole series of them. The next one will be on the 16th of January and we'll cover a brief history of self-harm. So if you want to know more information about that, let me know and I will send you that information. And this webinar will be available for you to download onto your device and watch at your own leisure at some point in the near future, within the next couple of days. Thank you very much for attending, everybody, and look forward to meeting you again. Thank you very much.